Were you guys able to complete this? I was asking if you guys were able to complete it. I guess that is no. So you guys still need to go back to the exercise, and that's why it's called exercise. I need you guys to fix up the lab without me being there. And if you have any question, you can always let me know. And that's why, I created that Slack environment where you can drop your comment, then we can discuss about it. So I'm just going to skip it, and let's start with today's class. So we started talking about the networking. We got to this part where we discuss the Azure Virtual Network, and I said there are different ways to connect to the internet. You can see we have the public endpoint, which we'll be talking about. Anything public means anything accessible from the internet. Then we'll discuss the private endpoint, which I explained that you only get to access that within the internet, and that's why it's called private. It's private to maybe the organization, is private to a specific, some specific resources. Then we have the virtual subnet, which I explained that when you create your virtual network or when you create your network, you need to at least divide them into chunks, and that's why we call the subnet. So now we have, like I said, Azure Virtual Network, just like the networking that we have on our on-premises environment, where we have cables, then we have some networking tools like the switch, the patch panel. We have those devices, that makes up that network, the switch, the patch panel, the faceplate that is actually on the wall. So most times when you get into the office, you need to get a cable, with RJ45 port that you plug to your device, your laptop, your desktop, and you plug the other side to that faceplate. That faceplate is the device or the tool on the wall that allows you to communicate with the switch. So we have what we call the router, which communicates with the internet. And this router also is the one that gives out IP addresses to all the devices on the office or in that network. So that same settings is what we have in the cloud now. We cannot see those cables, we cannot see those switch, we cannot see those patch panel. However, we still have the same network in the cloud. So we have that same settings, in the cloud. But now that's why it's called virtual, because we cannot see those tools. However, we still have some devices that needs to be connected to the internet. We still have some devices that needs to communicate with each other. That's why we have our virtual machine. We have our database. We have the storage account. Most of these things, they still need to be accessible. And the only way we access them is via networking. They might not be the normal cable, that we lay in the office. However, there's still this communication to that backend. So is either we go to, the public endpoint, if that particular device or particular tool or services that we are connecting to is not within our network, then we want to go to the public endpoint. Or we want to even allow, users that are not within our network to be able to access that service, then we'll use the public endpoint. But when we talk about the private endpoint, we just want that to be, not exposed to the internet. Then we have the virtual subnet, which, like I said, is a chunk. Then we have the network peering. So this network peering, what it does is, like I've explained last time, if we have a network in our tenant, and this network only functions for resources within this particular tenant or within this particular unit, and we want it to communicate with another network or another resource in another region, in another, specifically if we have a global company and we need maybe the resources or the devices that we are spin up in Azure, maybe in the UK center, to communicate with the ones in Nigeria. So we do what we call the VNet peering. What the VNet peering does is it merges, the communication of two networks together. So it allows two networks to communicate with each other, and that's what we call the VNet peering. So let's go ahead and so I expect you guys, at least go through this work too. And since most of you have not been able to finish it, please go back to the exercise, try to complete it. If you have any issues or if you face any issue, please do let me know. And I'm going to start with what we have for today. So we started talking about networking services, and I'll be explaining some of the networking services that we have in Azure. Now, the first one I'll be explaining today is the VPN gateway. So what is VPN gateway? You guys will understand, or at least you've had maybe a communication or with an IT person, and the person says, I work from home. I don't go to the office, and you say, how do you even work from home? Because most of the services we are connecting to are actually in the internet. But what if I need to access a service that is private to my organization? It is not publicly accessible to the internet. That means I need I need a service that will allow my system to communicate with that service, even when it's private to our organization. Because if it's public, that means anyone, even people that are not in our organization, will be able to connect to that particular service. But we want it to be restricted to only our organization. So we use what we call the VPN. So the VPN is the virtual private network. I'm sure we've all heard about VPN. So VPN, different type of VPN. So it makes your system, put it into a network with that service you are trying to connect to, or that resource that you are trying to connect to. And it will be as if they are actually in the same location. And that's what the VPN. So when you use a VPN, maybe you want to watch a Nigerian match and you use a VPN, you connect to a Nigerian IP. It takes your connection away from the UK and it takes it to Nigeria. So it look as if you're actually within the Nigerian network or within Nigeria location. And that's the same thing we have here. So Azure has its own. So if I have an organization and I've deployed some services in Azure, and I want to make sure, even when I'm working from home, I want to connect to that service, then I can use what we call a VPN, which is the virtual private network. So it allows me on my system to connect to that internet. So there are applications used for this. So Azure has its own thing. You can set up the VPN on your system. So we have three types of these services. We have the point to site, the point to the site to site, and the express route. So we explain these one after the other. So when we say the point to site, that means I want this connection to be between my Azure environment and a particular system. So this my particular system is a point, then Azure is a site. But when we talk about the site to site, we are doing the connection between the office, let's say the office, which is an environment on its own. So we call it a site also in Azure. Then the Azure environment, which is another site. So when we do a connection between site to site, so this is not restricted to just one particular device. That means anyone that, if you go into your office, you do not need to connect to any VPN again. Once you step into the office and you connect to the office internet, then automatically you will be able to connect to this Azure environment, without the need to still set up a VPN or any other thing. So that's the site to site. But these two I just talked about, those are connection over the internet. So you still need the internet to be able to connect to those devices. So the last one, comes with more advantage, which is the express route. When it comes to security wise, you do not want to make that connection over the internet or over the public space. And that's why we have the express route. So the express route connects you to the Azure environment through, you know, the backend. So Azure gives you that advantage, to be able to connect without the need to connect over the public, internet. So that's it. So all these terms, like I said, please, it's just for you to at least have an overview of what are some of the things we'll be discussing when we start, when we start the next course, which is the advanced course. So you do not need to worry about all these technical jargons. So at least just have an overview where we have a VPN, then we have some different types of VPN, the point to site, the site to site, the express route. So this is what is being explained here. So you have a virtual network in Azure. This is the Azure environment. When you see something like this, this is the icon that is used in representing VPN gateway. So when you see something like this, which is the cloud, that means you are in Azure. When you see something like this icon means you have an on-premise environment. So we have the cloud environment, then we have this connection from your on-premises through what we call a VPN, which is a tunnel. So this tunnel, which is the VPN gateway, it makes the connection happens between the cloud and the on-premises environment. So as you can see here, VPN gateway is used to send encrypted traffic between Azure and on-premises over the internet. So then this is the express route I talked about. So I told you we have two types of VPN here, the point to site and the site to site. And that's what you can see here. This is S2S, which is the site to site. Then we'll go ahead to talk about the express route. Like I said, express route allows you to connect, to your Azure environment over a private connection. So you do not need to go through the internet. So that's the good thing. When it comes to security, we want to go with express route. However, it's very costly. So it's only for dedicated purpose. If there is no need, if it's just to connect a small office, or if it's just to connect just one machine to your Azure environment, then you do not need to set up an express route. You rather go with a VPN gateway. So then we have what we call the DNS. So I'm going to explain the DNS. Just all these things written on the screen, you do not need to worry about it. So the DNS, the full meaning is domain name service. The explanation behind this is you try to access any website or web application. Let's take Google as an example. When you try to access Google, you just put in the google.com. Yes, and that's going to take it. However, the computer system doesn't understand that google.com that you put in there. The computer system doesn't understand English. We humans are the one that understand English. So the computer system only understand 1 and 0. So when we have 1 is 0, 1 is 0, that's the only thing the computer system. So that's what we call, the bit, the byte, and the like. So computer system only understand 1 and 0. So we need, and that's why we have, this IP address. The computer system understand that IP address. So we need to put, that's why sometimes maybe you encountered this in the past, or say, instead of you putting in the google.com, you can use the IP address to access a particular website. Yes. So for every hosting platform, when you create your virtual machine, you will notice that an IP address was assigned to that virtual machine. So if you host any website on that particular machine, to access that website, you can just go to, you can just use the IP address of that machine to access the website instead of using, the domain name, which is google.com or so. So that's where the DNS comes in. The DNS convert that English, that google.com, to an IP address for the system or for the computer to understand. And when the computer now, we have this DNS domain name system, it allows, the computer system look up, that google.com and compare it with the IP address. And when it now gets the IP address where that google.com is, then it will redirect the person trying to access google.com to the server that is hosting that website. And that's why, you'll see that page, comes up for you. There are lots of things going, in the back end. So typically, when you start going for interviews, you will get questions like, when you type in google.com into your browser, what happens? So they want to understand if you really understand, the networking part of the IT, and that's where you start talking about, the DNS and some other protocols. Let me see. We have one or two guys. Okay, so that's where you start talking about a whole lot of protocols like the DNS. There are some other protocols that works with this DNS. We call it the ARP and the RARP, address resolution protocol, and the reverse address resolution protocol. But like I said, do not worry yourself about all those technical terms. But for now, I'm sure you understand what this DNS system does. So it helps to convert that domain name, that google.com, to an IP address for the computer to understand. And also, when a computer is trying to give us back those information, that information on the website, is still going to help us convert that IP address back to the domain name. So that's what the DNS, works for. So then let's talk about storage. Any question? Um, based on what we've discussed. Can you guys even hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can
Yes,
hear
we can
you.
hear you, sir.
Okay. All right. That's fine. So I guess you guys do not have any question. All right. Now let's talk about storage. So for storage account, I'm sure everyone is taking advantage of this particular cloud service now. In the first class, I explained that almost everyone is already taking advantage of the cloud services. Now, we all use Google Drive or Google Photos or any other Google service to store, maybe our photos, our files, our folders. And this Google Drive, the backend technology is the storage, because it allows you to store your files, your folder, So that's it. And that's what we'll be discussing here, the technology behind the Google Drive. But Azure is not the one providing Google Drive. So we're talking about, the Azure Storage account, which is something related to the Google Drive. So yeah, we'll talk about what are the benefits of the storage services, which you guys know. Then we have some storage tiers that we'll discuss. So what are some of the tiers that we have in storage account? Then we'll discuss the redundancy options, which is like the replication option, to make sure that our storage account is always available. Then from there, we'll talk about the storage account options and types. Then identify options, talk about the tools that work with the storage account. All this easy copy, storage explorer, file sync. Then we'll look at the migration options, which includes the Azure Migrate and the data box. So let's talk about it. Now, storage account, just like our Google Drive, um, you must have it must have a globally unique name. Globally unique name in the sense that your storage account is going to be accessed over the internet. So that means when you are creating your storage account, like the virtual machine, I can create a virtual machine with a name called my VM, and Oreoluwa can also Oreofe can also create, his own virtual machine using that same name in his own environment, and it will take it. Yes, fine. But with storage account, since we have a URL, like a domain linked to that storage account, to each storage account you create, we have, a URL that is linked to it. That's why the name you give to a storage account must be globally unique, in the sense that if I set a name in my environment as my storage account, no one else in this world can use that name in their environment. You need to create a different name, which is different from what I've used. So it's just like your email address. So when I pick babafemi@gmail.com, no one else in this world can pick that babafemi@gmail.com. And that's how the storage account also works. So aside this, is a service provided over the internet, and that's why you have a URL attached to it. Then we'll determine the storage services and redundancy options. So let's take a look at all this. Now, for these redundancy options, this is just talking about the availability. How do we make sure that our storage account is always available so that we can access those files and folders that we put in there, regardless of the device you are accessing this with, regardless of the location you are accessing this from? You want to make sure that you're always, you have that right, or it's always available for you to access. Your files and folders are always there for you to access. So we have different redundancy options in this case. The first one is the locally redundant storage. The second one is the zone redundancies, then the geo redundant, then the geo zone. So let's start with the locally redundancy. So this is within that particular data center. So if you create a storage, you need to select what redundancy option you want to go with. So the default, I think the default is the LRS, which is the locally redundancy. So what this locally redundancy gives you is, we talked about the data center as an IT room, which contains multiple servers, and some other devices that allows you, to create your services, store files and folders and the likes. So that particular IT room, that particular data center, you are storing your files and folder in just one particular data center. However, we can have your files and folders stored on multiple, servers, but it's still within a single data center. That means if there is a downtime in that data center, you might not be able to access your storage account. However, because of this region pair, Azure can do a failover to another region for you, but it's still going to stay within a single data center, even when there is a failover, or a region pair where the storage account is being replicated to. But you will only have it within a single data center. Now, we have another option, which is the zone redundance. When we talked about zone, we said when you have multiple data centers within, you can have it within a particular zone. Then these zones, you can have multiple zones within a region. And this is what's playing out here. So we have a zone redundancy, meaning, 3 availability zones within a region. So your storage, your files and folders are actually stored, within 3 availability zones, within 3 zones, within a particular region. So that means we have multiple data centers that are hosting that particular files and folder. So A region might have more than one data center. A region might have just one data center. However, within that particular region, sorry, a zone might have one particular data center. A zone might have more than one. So, but in most cases, we have, let's say, three, data center within a particular zones. That means if you are saying your files and folders, your storage account will be stored within three available zones, within three availability zones, that means you will have your files and folders stored in multiple data centers within your zones, then within your region. Then we'll go ahead to talk about the geo-redundant, where we have it stored in just one single data center and also stored in a secondary region for you. Then the last one, which is the geozone, the same way we have it stored in the zone redundancy region, zone redundancy option. However, you are having it stored in another data center in another region. So these are some of the availability options, the redundancy options that we have. But if in the case of where there is a downtime, total downtime, Azure, I can assure you, Azure will still fade you over to another region. But you only have the option, to pick when you set up things like this. You have the option to pick which particular zone, which particular region, you want to set this to, depending on the region you selected. Then let's look at, the storage services, type of storage services that we have. So you can see we have different services here. You have the Azure Blob, the disk, the queue, the file, and the table. I will explain this one after the other. So when you have the blob stores what we call the unstructured data. So when we say unstructured data, like your images, your videos, the normal storage account that we know, this is, stored inside what we call the Azure Blob. So all these Netflix, if they are making use of Azure, they will be making use of the Azure Blob for the storage of their videos, because it stores what we call unstructured data. Then we have the disk. The disk is what your hard drive on that particular machine that you have, your SSD on your virtual machine. So this is a type of storage system provided by Azure, which is the normal disk that is attached maybe to a system, to some services. So then we have the queue. This queue is a type of storage account that is used in storing messages. So it is used between applications. So when we have applications that needs to communicate with each other by retrieving data, from each other, so we use what we call the storage queue. Then we move on the file. The file, just like the same way we have the disk. However, I don't know if you guys have noticed this. So when you join an organization, they set up your credentials, they give you your system, and you're able to access that particular system using your username and password. Then a new profile will be created for you. So that new profile, you can store your files, your folders, some information in that particular file, in that particular profile. Then if let's say you got robbed or you lost that particular system, if you are making use of what we call the Azure file, then you use this with the file sync, which we'll still talk about. You will be able to access all your profile from another system. There will be a sync to that particular system because your information is accessible over what we call the network. So Azure file gives you that that benefit to access what we call the network file. So most times you see when you want to share files, let's say you are working on your system and you need to share file with someone else within your particular network, we'll say now click on, the network path and go to this folder, So Azure file is actually the technology behind that particular scenario. Then the last one is the table. When you talk about table, just liken this to a database. So when we talk about database, so these are structured, non-relational storage, data storage. So when we talk about Azure tables, we talk about the database. So the SQL and the likes. So that's the different services, storage services that we have in Azure. The blob that's used for storing unstructured data, like the text, images, videos, and the likes. The disks, which provide disks to virtual machines, applications, and the like. The queue used for storing informations that are used within maybe two applications and the like. Then the files, accessible network file, then the table, just like our database. So, I talked about the fact that when you create a storage account, you need to give it a unique name because each storage account has its own URL. The same way, you might not be seeing this, but when you go into your Google Drive, when you put in your email address and password, if you check the URL, it will redirect you to your particular URL, So that's what you are seeing here also. So for each storage account that you create in Azure, there's what we call a public endpoint. And like I said, a public endpoint is what you can access over the internet. So when you put in an email, when you create a storage account, if I say Baba Femi, then if I create a blob storage, my blob storage endpoint will be babafemi.blob.core.windows.net. The same way, if I create a database or a table, it will be babafemi.table.core.windows.net. Even when you can still use a custom domain, this is just an initial domain that will be created if or whenever you create a storage account, depending on the storage account you've created. So then let's talk about the tiers. So for storage account has the services. We've discussed the services, the different type of storage account that we can create. Then we've discussed the redundancy options. Now we'll discuss the tier. Then we'll go ahead to round it up with the types of storage accounts. So the services, the kind of storage account service you can create, those are the blob, the table that we've discussed. But we'll still talk about the type of storage account. But before we get there, let's talk about the tiers. The tiers means when you're setting up your storage account, how do you use your storage account? Is this something you use every time? Is this something you're just using, as a backup, or you use it maybe once in 90 days or so, or once in 30 days? So depending on how you use your storage account, you need to select the tier. So if you set up a database that needs to be accessed every day, then you need to go with what we call the alt tier type of storage, because it's optimized, for frequent access. Then if it's not something that needs to be accessed every day, maybe at least maybe once in 30 days or something, then you want to go with the cool. But if it's something you want to put in there and say, oh, we don't need this, maybe we need it once in 90 days, twice in 90 days, there's no reason for us to. So you want to go with the code. The archive gives you, let's say you want to have some backup for a long time, and you just want that backup to continue, without you going there to, pick up the backup frequently, then you can use the archive. The good thing about this is you can change the tier, the access tier, whenever you want it. If at the end of the day, there is no need for you to access the particular storage frequently anymore. Then you can change it to the code or the cool or the archive based on your need at that particular time. Then let's talk about, okay, so this is another exercise. This exercise, so what you'll be doing here is to create a storage blob. So like I said, blobs allows you to store unstructured data like images, text, and the likes. So you need to create, a storage account on Azure the same way you've created a virtual machine. So if you click on the all resources, then you can look for a storage account, or you can even search for the storage account from the search panel. Then when you search for the storage account, then under the storage account, you create the blob storage. I think I can. Let me just do this. I'll go to my Azure environment, and please, if you have any question at any point in time, or even when you are trying to complete any of these exercise, please do let me know. I'm going to show you how to create a storage account. And I think what they said is to create a storage account, create a blob, upload, and access a blob. So I might not fix everything, but at least. So the same way we have it here, where you can click on create a resource. Then from the create a resource, you can look for, storage account. On the left, then here, you can click on, the storage account and try to create it. And if you do not want to go to, this route, from here, from home, you can just search for a storage account. This is the easiest way of doing this. Then I've got one storage account here, but I'm just going to, try to create a new one. So now you select the basic tab, just like the way you've created your virtual machine. If you have done that, then you select a group name, then the storage account name. Like I said, it has to be unique. If I do storage, let's check something. This is telling me this name has been taken already. It must be unique. So I need to maybe Baba Femi. Now, okay. So the storage account contains. Oh yeah, you have to be only small letter. So let's see. Someone has taken. Okay, someone no. Then you want to select the performance. We'll still talk about the storage account type. Now you can see the redundancy options. So you can select the locally redundancy, the geo redundancy, the zone redundancy based on your organization need. I'm just going to go with the locally redundancy. So yeah, you do not need to worry yourself about this. However, some of the archive tier that we've talked about, if you want to select the alt, the cool, depending on the type of storage you're creating. I think if you are doing version, let me see if this will change. If I try to click on the premium, it gives you more option, to select whatever you want to create. So let's see. Okay, so the premium will always make sure you have it as cool. Yeah, if you are doing the as alt, so you want to select. Let's see. So I will just go back to the basic, and go back to the standard so that at least we see the option of we selecting, the type of tier that we want to create. So I'm just going to leave this the way it is. If I want to enable, Azure file, I can do that from here. Then I'll go ahead to create, just like, the network. Do you want to access this particular storage from the public, public access, or do you want to deny, public access and use only private access? What are the data encryptions, and the like? So we'll still talk about all these ones. So I'll go back to the storage account I've created. that's how you create a storage account, and it's asking you to create, a blob which will be under your container here. So these are the storage services that you have, which is the blob storage, the file, the queue, the table. You will not see the disks here because the disks are actually attached to the machines, So you can only create the disks on the machine. Then let's say I want to do the container, which is the blob. So I can click here and set up, a blob, So this one, when I create this storage account, it now takes me to where I can now start uploading, my file. If I want to upload the file, the text file, images, videos, and the likes. So that's how this is what is needed, for you to be done. This is what is needed to be done with what's actually explained here. So you need to create a storage account. Then you need to create a blob container, which I've just done. Then you need to upload and access the blob. So you upload and try to access that particular file you've created. So I will send this to the group once we're done. Then I think we still have, okay, we're almost the past time. Let me see if we can just talk about, let's just talk about that 2-3 slides. Then the next class, which is tomorrow, we can finish up with the identity, access, and security. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So here, I'm so sorry, I'm giving you too much information, but at least, like I said, these are just overview, so you do not need to worry yourself about most of this information. And that's why I need you guys to also help me. Help me in what sense? You need to go back to that documentation and try to read that documentation. I know everyone is busy, but in IT, there is a way we do, this our reading. You do not need to read 3 hours, 2 hours in a day. No. IT documentations sometimes might be boring. So if you can take out time to read maybe 30 minutes in a day or just 1 hour in a day, that's fine. So if you do 1 hour per day, at the end of 7 days, you will have done 7 hours, which is a perfect way of reading. At least you can still spare 30 minutes. Even let's say when you are in the train, going to the office, anytime, just try to, check this documentation. So let's talk about um, some of the things you can do. The good thing is these are some of the services Azure provides. Talking about the Azure Migrate. This Azure Migrate, we are just going to, discuss it on the high level. Let's say you have people or organizations are moving from on-premises to the cloud. And when we say they are moved from on-premises to the cloud, are we saying they are going to carry their server and put it in the cloud, or take their server that is actually in their data center or in their IT room and take it to Azure data center? No. But those information on that your storage account, on that your server, on that your hard drive, you can move those information, those files and folders, using what we call the Azure Migrate. And we'll create almost the same thing that you have on the on-premises, that hard drive that you have on the on-premises, that virtual machine or that server that you have on the on-premises. We'll move it, we'll do a lift and shift, meaning we'll migrate it the same way it is actually on your system. So if I migrate my system now, that means the operating system that is actually on this system, all my files and folders, all my configurations will be moved from this my system to a replica in Azure, meaning I do not need to configure anything. The same way it is now will be moved to the cloud. And that's what we use a service called the Azure Migrate. So what it does is it does an assessment, to see this is the kind of, virtual machine you're using on on-premises. This is kind of services that you're using on your on-premises environment. We'll migrate the same thing, to the cloud. Then we have the data box. The data box is majorly for moving your disaster recovery back up to Azure. So, back in the days when for us not to lose our files and folders, we'll do a backup of them, and we can actually back up to maybe a different server. So that's your backup. We want to move them also to the cloud. So we use what we call the Azure Data Box for this purpose. So Azure Data Box, the same way the Azure Migrate works, which lift and shift that service that you're using on-premises to the cloud. The data box moves your backup, moves it to the cloud so that you can have, what we call the disaster recovery in case there is disaster. It is not every time you rely on Azure on, failing over to the region. You can also have, your data backup in the cloud, even when you are using it on the on-premises. If you are still using your on-premises machine, you can still back up to the cloud. So Azure Data Box gives you that access, to use the cloud service for your disaster recovery or for your backup. Then let's talk about how do we manage files and folders that we put in our storage account. So we have 3 ways we manage these. We manage using, the command prompt. So when you see something like the AV copy, so we are talking about the command prompt, we'll still get that this is a PowerShell module. So we'll still get to use PowerShell. For you people that feel like when I come to the cloud, do we really need to learn, programming language? And no, you will not learn it. However, when you don't learn it, it will take you time to complete a whole lot of tasks, things that you can automate. So we use command line just for automation. Automation in the sense that something you will do for 2 hours, sitting on your system trying to press your GUI or click your GUI, I can finish it up within 5 minutes if I know about automation. So you do not, like I said, it's not compulsory for you to learn this. This is on the side. However, it's a very good practice. At least anything automation, I'm sure if you start looking at some of the job requirements for cloud engineer role, I need you guys to start looking at it. You will see that some of the requirements will be for you to understand PowerShell automation. It might not really be, the main focus. The main focus is for you to understand how the Azure environment works, what are services that you need to use when, you want to perform something. However, you want to know this on the side. So a good way to access your files and folder is to use a command line. But most of us, we don't use it. So we use the GUI, which takes us to what we call the Azure Storage Explorer. That's the same way you have your file explorer on your virtual machine or on your physical machine. So you can use what we call the Storage Explorer to manage files and folders that you store in Azure. You can install it on your system and it will look like how you have your file and folders, on your system, the same way we access those files and folders. Now, the last one is the sync that I've talked about. When you use the Azure environment, the Azure Sync service. So because sync files are actually files accessible over the internet, over the network. That means if I'm presented with a machine and unfortunately, the machine got damaged or I lost the machine, if I'm using Azure File Sync, if I log into another system, without my username and password, all my files and folders will come back, on that particular system, even when I've lost my initial system. And that is, a very, very, very good, way or a very good service for you to use. So it always also allows you to synchronize your files and folders, the one you have on your on-premises machine, that your machine. Then when you use Azure File Sync, every files that you store in your storage account in Azure, you can also access it on your on-premise machine, as if they reside on your on-premises machine. So it allows that synchronization between the Azure and on-premises files in bi-directional way, so in two ways. So you can sync what you have on your machine to the cloud, the same way you can sync what you have in the cloud, to your machine. I think that's the end of the class.